February 13, 1258. In the halls of the Abbasid palace, the fountains have fallen silent. For the people of Baghdad, this is more than an inconvenience. It is an omen. In a city where water flows through countless channels, where engineering marvels have sustained civilization for centuries, fountains do not simply stop, not without reason. Beyond the walls, a Mongol army stretches across the horizon. Within days, the capital of the Islamic world will fall, and what follows will reshape the course of history for centuries to come. This is the story of how the Abbasid Caliphate ended, how one of humanity's greatest centers of learning was destroyed, and why February 1258 remains one of the darkest months in medieval history. The Abbasid Caliphate. To understand the catastrophe, we must first understand what stood in Baghdad. The Abbasid Caliphate had ruled for over 500 years, founded in 750 CE. It had transformed Baghdad into perhaps the greatest city on earth. At its height in the 9th and 10th centuries, Baghdad was home to over 1 million people. Its house of wisdom attracted scholars from 3 continents. Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, and Persian astronomy all flowed into this intellectual crossroads, where they were translated, debated, and advanced. By 1258, the Caliphate's political power had diminished significantly. The Caliph al-Mustasim was a religious figurehead more than an emperor. Real power had fragmented among various sultanates and regional powers, but Baghdad itself remained invaluable, a symbol of Islamic civilization and a repository of centuries of accumulated knowledge. Al-Mustasim, the 37th Abbasid Caliph, was by most accounts an ineffective leader. Contemporary sources describe him as indecisive, more interested in personal pleasures than statecraft. His chief advisor Ibn al-Alqami would later be accused by some chroniclers of conspiring with the Mongols, though this remains debated among historians. What is certain is that al-Mustasim fatally misjudged the threat approaching his city. The Mongol Empire in 1258 was the largest land empire in human history. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, Mongol armies had conquered from Korea to Eastern Europe. They had destroyed the Khwarezmian Empire, subjugated the Rus principalities, and defeated every major power that stood against them. Their military success came from superior organization, tactics, and logistics. Mongol armies used combined cavalry tactics, sophisticated siege equipment often designed by Chinese and Persian engineers, and an intelligence network that mapped enemy territories before invasion. They were not mindless barbarians, as propaganda sometimes portrayed them. They were a highly disciplined military machine. The army approaching Baghdad was led by Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan and brother of the great Khan Mangi. Hulagu had been given a clear mission: subjugate the Islamic world. He had already destroyed the assassin fortresses of Persia. Now he turned toward Baghdad. Contemporary sources, including the Persian historian Ottomalik Juvayni, who traveled with Hulagu's army, record that Hulagu sent multiple diplomatic messages to al-Mustasim. The terms were standard for Mongol diplomacy: submit peacefully and your city will be spared, resist, and face total destruction. Al-Mustasim's response was defiant. According to Juvayni, the Caliph warned that the entire Islamic world would rise against any attack on Baghdad. He invoked divine protection and the sanctity of his office. He believed his position made him untouchable. He was catastrophically wrong. The siege begins. In January 1258, Mongol forces surrounded Baghdad. Estimates of their numbers vary widely in the sources, from 100,000 to 300,000, though modern historians tend toward the lower estimate. What matters is that they vastly outnumbered Baghdad's defenders. The Mongols did not rely on time to starve the city out. They brought siege engines, catapults, and explosive projectiles, likely derived from Chinese gunpowder technology. They systematically attacked the walls from multiple directions. Baghdad's defenses, impressive by earlier standards, were not built to withstand this level of sustained assault. The city's military forces had been neglected during decades of relative peace. When Mongol forces breached the eastern walls on February 5, organized resistance quickly collapsed. By February 10, Mongol troops controlled most of the city. Al-Mustasim, realizing too late the magnitude of his miscalculation, attempted to negotiate. Hulagu agreed to meet him. On February 13, the Caliph left his palace and surrendered to Hulagu Khan. What happened next would be recorded by multiple chroniclers, each adding details that historians continue to analyze and debate today. The Caliph's fate. The execution of Caliph al-Mustasim is documented by several near-contemporary sources, though they differ in certain details. The most widely cited account comes from the Persian historian Rashid al-Din, writing several decades later. According to Mongol custom, which treated the spilling of royal blood on the ground as taboo, the Caliph was executed without bloodshed. The method described in multiple sources involves wrapping him in carpets and either trampling him with horses or crushing him under a collapsing structure. This method, while brutal, aligned with Mongol traditions regarding the execution of royalty. Some accounts, including one preserved by Rashid al-Din, describe Hulagu mocking the Caliph by forcing him to witness his treasure, asking where his divine protection had gone. While these dramatic details cannot be fully verified, they reflect the contempt Mongol leaders showed toward rulers who resisted them. The Caliph's death marked the official end of the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. A collateral line would later be established in Cairo under Mamluk protection, but the institution never regained its former prestige. The sack of Baghdad, what followed the caliph's execution, was systematic destruction. For approximately 1 week, Mongol forces occupied Baghdad and killed a substantial portion of its population. Estimating casualties is extremely difficult. Medieval sources routinely exaggerate numbers. Contemporary chronicles claim anywhere from hundreds of thousands to over 1 million dead. Modern historians generally estimate between 200,000 and 800,000 casualties. Acknowledging the impossibility of precision, the killing was not random slaughter. Mongol military practice typically involved organized massacre as psychological warfare. By creating examples of total destruction, they encouraged other cities to surrender without resistance. This strategy proved effective across their empire. Certain groups were specifically targeted. According to multiple sources, scholars and religious leaders were systematically killed. This was not anti-intellectual barbarism, but strategic. Eliminating local leadership made conquered territories easier to control. The House of Wisdom, the destruction of Baghdad's libraries, particularly the legendary House of Wisdom, represents one of history's great intellectual catastrophes. The House of Wisdom had been the Islamic world's preeminent center of learning. For centuries, it had preserved and translated Greek, Persian, and Indian texts. Islamic scholars had made groundbreaking advances in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Much of this work existed in unique manuscripts. Contemporary accounts describe books being thrown into the Tigris River in such quantities that the water ran black with ink. While this image has become iconic, historians debate its literal accuracy. What is certain is that an enormous amount of irreplaceable material was destroyed. The long-term impact is difficult to quantify but undeniably significant. While other centers of Islamic learning survived in Cairo, Damascus, and elsewhere, the loss of Baghdad's collections represented a major setback for intellectual continuity. Aftermath and consequences. The fall of Baghdad sent shockwaves throughout the medieval world. For the Islamic community, the destruction of the Caliphate seat was psychologically devastating, comparable to the sack of Rome in European consciousness. In practical terms, the Mongol conquest of Baghdad opened the Middle East to further Mongol expansion. Hulag's forces continued west, destroying Aleppo and Damascus. Only their defeat by the Mamluks at the Battle of Anjalut in 1260 halted their advance. The Mongol conquest fundamentally altered the political landscape of the Islamic world. The age of the Caliphate as a unifying institution effectively ended. Regional powers became more important. Trade routes shifted. The center of Islamic civilization gradually moved toward Egypt and later the Ottoman Empire. Scholars continue to debate the extent of intellectual loss. Some argue that while Baghdad's destruction was catastrophic, the broader Islamic intellectual tradition survived and recovered. Others see it as a permanent setback that contributed to a relative decline in scientific innovation in subsequent centuries. Conclusion. The fall of Baghdad in 1258 stands as one of history's pivotal moments. It marked the end of an era, the destruction of a great city, and the loss of irreplaceable cultural heritage. The human cost was enormous. Tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, died in the siege and its aftermath. Families were destroyed. Communities were scattered. Knowledge accumulated over centuries vanished in days. Yet, even from this catastrophe, history moved forward. The Islamic world adapted and rebuilt. New centers of learning emerged. Scholarship continued, though the scars of 1258 never fully healed. The story of Baghdad's fall reminds us that civilizations, no matter how advanced or seemingly secure, remain vulnerable. Knowledge, once lost, cannot easily be recovered. And history, when it turns violent, spares no one, not even those who believe themselves untouchable. The fountains of Baghdad fell silent in February 1258. It would be centuries before the city regained even a fraction of its former glory. But the memory of what was lost, and the lessons of how it happened, echo across the centuries to reach us today.